So I want to bring out our panelists. We have Howard Herring, who's president and CEO of the New World Symphony. Welcome, Howard. We have Sean Jones, trumpeter, and Richard and Elizabeth Case, chair of jazz studies at Peabody. And we have Susan Zhang, who's co-director of Concert Truck. And I also want to welcome back Wendel Patrick to the conversation. So nice to have you all. Thanks for being with us today. And I think maybe a good place to start would be just to kind of go around and ask the three panelists that have joined us, what you heard in these presentations today, and give a little bit of a reaction to that. I want to come back in another question to asking you individually about how you all think about these issues, but I'm curious to get a little bit of reaction to what you've heard today. So maybe, Howard, you want to kick it off? Sure, happy to do that. Wendel, that was terrific. And our other two presenters as well. I heard a lot of an emphasis on listening. There's been, in this art form, a great deal of instruction given over the years. And in the case of Brad, there was talk about no hierarchy. Sarah's listening very carefully to the folks at Jacobi. And then last of all, Wendel, you used the word explore several times, and I think I knew what you meant by that. So those are the three words that stood out for me, but it is clear that we are at a moment in time when barriers are breaking down, when people are trying new things, when the old order is not going to necessarily survive the digital disruption that is ours to explore. And I think it's going to be fascinating to talk about next normal, but I love all three of these presentations for those reasons. Thanks, Howard. Sean.
Thank you, Dean Bronstein. It's a pleasure to be here, and good to see all of these amazing folks that are on the screen here. What I heard with each presentation, and they were all fantastic, but sort of culminating with the experience of Wendel Patrick, who is a dear friend and someone that I look up to often, is the word discomfort. We've all been pretty uncomfortable in the past year and a half. And I think that if we're able to find comfort in the discomfort of life, then we're able to sort of deal with all of these unknowns and unexpected events that happen. Wendel, you summarized it perfectly with your own life experience, just literally thinking like, okay, I'm at a young age, this is what I'm going to do. You already had your mind made up, it sounded like. And then boom, something happens. And you pivoted so fast, so quickly, realizing that, you're still a musician, you're still an artist, and you're just going to diversify. And you're going to become comfortable in your discomfort. So without going too far deep into that, I'm sure we'll get further into that. That's my biggest takeaway with that. And being an improvising musician, specifically in the art form of or the genre of jazz music, I'm very comfortable in the unknown. So this is sort of a blessing in disguise this past year and a half. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dean Bronstein.
Thanks, Sean. Great comments. And Susan, how did you hear what we all heard? You're muted, I think.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Dean Bronstein. First of all, I thought all of the presentations were fantastic and inspiring. And so there are a few things that really jumped out at me. I felt like everyone talked a little bit about improvisation. And I think that is essentially flexibility within music making, right? And I think that also translates into sort of more organizational aspects of the industry. And I'm really glad that everyone is talking about that now. And I hope that does end up becoming more part of the curriculum. And it's something I wish that I were better at, frankly. Other things, and we talked a lot about discomfort. I think as I was getting into entrepreneurship, something that was very freeing for me was the relationship with failure. And I think that that's something that I heard a lot of, this idea of like being able to mess up and to not judge yourself in a personal way. I think that that is so important for growth and flexibility. And something else that resonated with me was when Wendel was talking about being in control of his career, sort of not taking a path that is expected, but taking upon himself to learn these skills to do what he needed to do, whether it was because of to save on overhead costs or otherwise. And that really resonated with me and some of the things that I've had to do in my own career.
Thanks, Susan. So Wendel, I won't make you comment on yourself, but I don't know if you had a chance to hear the other two presenters, but if you did, would be curious to get any response you have.
Thank you, Dean Bronstein. Yes, I did, I was particularly taken by Brad's work in the prison system. I think it's important to recognize that the arts and all experiences really are for everyone. And, in the same way that people often think of certain sort of members of society or demographics as, that they should for some reason be excluded from certain things, the same thing happens organizationally and institutionally. And sometimes it happens without people even realizing that they're doing it. And so that, that really struck me. I think just the effort to include people from all walks of life, and I think that that's something that again, institutions and educational and performing arts institutions can certainly take a page out of that book.
Thanks, Wendel, and a great presentation you did.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I have to just, if I can, offer a couple of thoughts on what I heard. Also, I think I was struck with Sarah about by her comments about, I think the term she used was broad curiosity, and I'm of course talking about improvisation and learning improvisation. I agree with you, Susan. I wish I had learned that as well. But this idea of being curious and looking beyond sort of the silo that I think musicians or performers tend to be in. And the other thing that struck me in Brad's presentation was that, when he talked about no hierarchy, and he talked about risk getting it wrong, and he talked about let go of your plans, and he talked about the toxic dynamic, this is provocative, toxic dynamic of mentor and apprentice. And I think all of these things are almost sacred cows in our field in a lot of ways. And so I'm interested in sort of, in the way, confronting those directly. We're all trained to do the opposite in many ways of, or to think in the opposite way in terms of as performers. And so it really challenges us, I think, to think, about what we do in a very different way. I'd like to sort of come back to the individual panelists and ask you, because you all have unique experiences and have done incredible work, and I think very innovative work, all of you. And I'd like to, I can't resist. I got to start with Howard, because Howard and I share a similar background in terms of we both have come from the orchestra world and been in the orchestra world. And I think it's, I'll put it right out there. I think one of the big challenges when we talk about orchestras today is the challenge around flexibility and nimbleness, and not just orchestras, large artistic institutions. But I'm really interested in hearing from each of you, and maybe starting with Howard, how you're grappling, what you're doing, and how you're grappling with these issues as you think about the future. And in the case of obviously New World, Howard, it's a training institution as we are, and so I know you're thinking about these things and have to be thinking about these things. So tell us a little bit about how you're approaching this.
Yeah, sure. First thought, or first important information, we run what we call an experiential curriculum, or I should say we have created an experiential curriculum. You learn by doing, and that's first of all by performing, and that's sort of a standard 5 or 6 day sequence of rehearsal and performance. and that's orchestra and solo recital and chamber music. So on that score, we look very much like a conservatory, but it goes well beyond that. That's where the musicianship begins. The next piece is how we relate to the community. If anyone has been to our building, you know that it is very much about the community. The facade of the building is set up to take projection. It's a 70 by 110 foot projection wall. We have what we call wallcast, where we bring the music outside to the public for free. But it also has to do with how our players learn by being in the community, learn about the community, learn how to relate to the community. We also have a good bit of entrepreneurial work that is nestled into this curriculum. We have something called Blue Projects. It's an acronym, not important for this discussion, but the idea is that you identify an audience, or you identify a group of people in Miami, and you would like to be with them, working with them, or working for them in a musical capacity to further their goals. In some cases, that's as simple as performing somewhere that's a little unusual, but in other cases, it's hospital work, it's education work, and last of all, equity and diversity. That obviously is a part of all of our lives now. And how we lace that into these various forms of community and performance and entrepreneurial work is critical. We are not like a conservatory. We are not like Peabody. We don't grant a degree, and that gives us a certain freedom to push our players to go further. They come here because they want to be in an orchestra. At least that's what they think when they arrive. And over 3 years of fellowship, they are given the chance to find their own voice and to imagine other ways of being an artist in the world. And we hope that they leave us with a much broader perspective about their own abilities and also about how they can serve their communities going forward. A lot of broad generalities there, but that's the background.
What kind of world do you think they face?
Oh, this is, we've heard Wendel talk about it. This is digital to the core. And I've watched our players over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years come to us, maybe 10 years since we opened the building, just run headlong into the digital realities. Now, this building was imagined in the early 2000s and constructed and opened in 2011. There's fiber throughout the building. There's capture and playback everywhere. We are online constantly. And then we have what I was describing as the wallcast, which is a digital delivery, but very much local. So they have to learn how to talk to the camera. They have to learn what distribution means. They have to understand how you distribute your artistry, whatever that might be, in an online setting. And that is just bedrock as far as the future goes. But they don't come to us with that realization. It's fascinating to me that as digital natives, and they are, they still haven't put that together with the business of how classical music, or I guess we'll use classical music for now, as that form of expression in a digital environment.
Thanks, Howard. Sean, you have a different world in some ways, but facing many similar issues. So I'm really interested to get sort of what you're doing, how you're thinking about getting your students ready for this world, and what you think that world looks like.
Well, I think we have a unique opportunity here. I think that the pandemic has sort of pulled the veil up from several issues in our music and in our country. I think that basically the United States specifically is suffering from a version of a cultural identity crisis, in that we really don't truly know who we are in terms of the arts. We are truly out of many one, e pluribus unum, but on paper, we do a pretty terrible job at saying that. And I feel that institutions like the Peabody are literally ground zero for that change. And I'm very excited to be a part of that change that's happening here with the ideas around curriculum development, around American music, or music of the Americas. It's time for us to focus on what we do here in this country and being proud of what we do here. The fact that we can play music that is mixed with various cultures from around the world and put our own little spin on it is fantastic. I think that every musician that is born in this country or that comes to this country should know how to play a blues. They just should. They should know who the major blues artists are. Same thing for gospel music, for jazz, for bluegrass. That's who we are. That's American. And why is it that our American conservatories don't push that music first? That doesn't mean that the orchestral format needs to go away. I love the orchestral format. Most people don't know this, but I actually do not have a jazz degree. All of my degrees are in classical music performance. So there is a way to address the rigors of classical music performance and all that comes with that, and still promote American music. I think that some of the things that we're doing in the jazz department is basically looking at the degree in two phases. A sort of basic way of looking at it, if you will, is looking at it as an associate's degree, which covers all of the fundamentals that you need to be a great musician. That's pedagogy, theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then your junior and senior year, you're focused on you. Okay. That means that whatever genre that you want to focus on, whatever ideas you have around music production, whatever that is, then you can focus on that. And then you graduate knowing a little bit more about what you want to do specifically when you leave the building. So those are a couple of things that we're doing, just to focus on American music first, I think is important. And also looking at the 4-year degree track in a different way so that students actually graduate knowing, or at least having some idea with what direction they want to go in and who they are and what their musical identity is upon graduation.
You know, it's so interesting because I think there is a, you know, we, as you alluded to, Sean, we've shaped up with the breakthrough curriculum here, you know, some pretty significant curriculum changes, and yet I still think it's a work in progress, because one of the things that you alluded to, you were talking about improvisation, you were talking about, I mean, one of the things I don't think that, you know, music schools generally do a good job of is understanding and prosecuting this question or this issue around, you know, what kinds of skill sets are of value. We put very strict parameters around our value proposition for what we consider to be, you know, a high level of musical skill. And so we don't test somebody's improvisational ability coming into a general program, right? And I think it is, and that says something about value proposition, I think. And so I think it's, you know, we really want to look at this in a serious way. I think that I think we need to grapple with that, you know, in some ways, and understand that there's a broader view of what constitutes excellence, quality, skills, all the things that you know, that you obviously manifest and your students manifest, you know, on the jazz side of the house. But also, you know, there's no reason to be this, I think, this artificial separation between that side of the house and the classical side of the house.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's expectation, right?
Yeah.
Once a student starts to, they get to high school or those, where they start to expect things, or they assume that things are expected of them. If you go to Peabody, you are expected to do X, Y, and Z. If you go to this place, you are expected to do this, or this is what it means to be a classical musician or a jazz musician. I think it's time for us to address that expectation and say, hey, let's broaden this a little bit. This is what it means to be a great artist. And it's varied. And even with pedagogy, because you can play this etude or this particular thing, or if you can sight read, does that make you a better artist than someone that does not do those things? And I think it ultimately starts with what we're doing here and basically eliminating some of those expectations while maintaining certain levels. They don't have to be separated. You could have both there. The trumpet is still the trumpet, and you have to sound good on it. However, the trumpet can be in jazz, it can be in this genre, it can be in that genre. And so, again, I'm excited about what we're doing at Peabody by addressing these things and sort of broadening the expectation for those that come into the institution and those that are currently here, both on the student side and the professor side.
So thanks, Sean. So Susan, you have a really interesting project in the concert truck and have done some really, some incredible things in the last couple of years with it. And I'm interested in sort of how you got to that point. I mean, I know your training was conventional training, I think, in many ways. And but what sort of led you there, and how you think about this and the work, a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that like Wendel, I went into piano thinking, okay, I have to do the competitions and then I'll get management or something like that. And it just wasn't really for me. And I also found, in some ways, I mean, I'm very thankful for the training that I got, but I also did find it somewhat restrictive, and I felt a bit isolated from the community at large. I had a lot of questions about how I fit in and what it is that I contribute. And especially as I got older, trying to find more meaning in what it is that I do, both for myself and for other people. So I was really, really fortunate that within my graduate studies, I did have the opportunity to get out of the box a little bit, to be put in more real world situations like Howard was talking about for the fellows. And I really think that that's the only way to test what you're able to do and to test your assumptions on what is of value to people. And as I was trying to figure out more ways of being more connected to the community, my partner had pitched this idea to me, and I was like, oh, that's it. We have to try it. I'd also watched this movie Chef with Jon Favreau. I was like obsessed with the idea of traveling the country and but doing it with music rather than food. And so yeah, that's really how a lot of this started. And again, I was really fortunate to have mentors who supported me, who encouraged me, who connected me with the right people to help make the thing a reality. And I continue to go to these people for advice and for help on all of these things. And I think that it sort of evolved as an experiment. So as we're talking about curiosity, that's kind of how we had to approach it, because I think if I didn't for myself, I would have been too afraid to do it. So with each step, I was like, okay, let's test some assumptions here. Let's see if this is actually going to work in this space. Let's see if we can make connections with these community leaders and these who we're not familiar with, and to see if it's right, to see if we can build trust, to see if this programming will work in this space. And so it's just a constant series of experiments that we're continuing to do. And through that, I feel like that's how we've gotten to where we are today, and we'll continue to experiment as we move forward.
But you're also working with some, it's interesting because you're working with some major arts institutions. So I think, if I have this right, correct me if I'm wrong, Carnegie Hall. You've done some stuff with Dallas Symphony, I think. I'm
actually in Dallas right now.
So that's my old stomping ground.
Yeah, we have not worked with Carnegie Hall yet, but we have worked with the Kennedy Center. This summer we were with Aspen Music Festival. So yes, we have worked with some major organizations, which has been a very interesting experience, being basically a two-man organization trying to work with a larger institution on furthering their goals and ours as well.
And talk a little bit more about this, because I think one of the things that I'm interested in, and we'll talk about, a little bit today, certainly this afternoon, is what can large institutions learn from smaller institutions?
Yeah, I think that this is a really great question. I don't know that I am the most equipped to answer it, simply because I haven't participated on the larger organization side of things. I will say that it's very interesting to see the various cultures of each institution, the amount of bureaucracy that there is, or the kinds of things that each institution values. So it's usually a top-down thing. So for instance, if a CEO has a background in marketing, marketing is like a priority throughout the organization, marketing and branding. So for us, there's very little that we can control in some ways as a small organization. There's some things that we can talk about in negotiations, but what we've tried to do is at the very least pick up on the needs of other organizations and to be as accommodating for those needs as possible. And I do think that as a small organization, because we don't have to go through a large board or any kind of red tape in that way, we can just create things that they then can use for whatever it is they need. So whether it's materials or programming or anything else. So that kind of flexibility, I feel like, has been supremely beneficial for us. And I think that organizations like that we are low maintenance in that way. Although I do understand the need to have resources as you grow, as you have resources and you have all of these things that you need to do, there is more red tape because there's just more parties that you have to handle. So I honestly, from that perspective, I'm not totally sure where that perfect middle ground is.
But you're bringing something they don't have.
Yes. Yeah.
What are you bringing that they don't have?
I just had a conversation with the CEO of Dallas a couple nights ago about this. I think something that we can do is volume. We can do a lot because of the portability of what we have. We can go anywhere, and we can, if there's a space that an organization has really been trying to tap into, establish relationships. So if we can just do it, and there's no questions about it, there's like very little permitting or anything that needs to happen. I think that it's still presented in a very professional way, so that it's not like a glorified busking situation. I think that something else that we do as musicians personally, particularly my partner Nick, is that he's very open to collaborating with musicians of all genres, and pushes himself to do so. So a lot of times what we'll do is, even with the Dallas Symphony, we've worked with local musicians, people from the area who are outside of classical music. For example, like Sean Martin played on the truck, who's from keyboards from Snarky Puppy, and it's a way to, I feel like, co-create with the community that you're in, so it doesn't feel like. And I'm very sensitive to the idea of like going into a space and being a guest there instead of being like the arbiter of culture or whatever, because that's totally not what we are and not what we ever want to be. So this sense of co-creation with the community, I think, for me, is really important, and for me is very integral to breaking down barriers between an institution and its own community.
That's great. Wendel, so I'm kind of interested in picking up on this theme of because you have a unique background and you're doing unique work today, and the breadth of what you can do and have done is really pretty astounding. I'm interested in sort of like, so how do you what's your dream for what a student who's coming through a major music school, whatever, whether it's Peabody or, and name whatever, whomever, that should look like? What should that experience look like?
Well, that's a great question, and I will say that I feel very fortunate to not only be at Peabody, and sort of have that as a home base and a safe place to land, essentially, but also to be in a position where now I have a lot of young people, who are, some of them are high school students, some of them are music school students elsewhere, who just send me messages, basically saying that they admire what I've done and sort of my overall philosophy, and what can they do to sort of find themselves in a similar position in 5 or 10 or 20 years. And I have to say that, from the outside looking in, it probably, it looks great. It's sort of like a wonderful arrival point, but it's really been sort of a beautiful, series of sort of stumbling forward into opportunities and experiences, and having the support of friends such as Sean and Susan, who I've met through music over the last, I think I've met you both in the last 5 years, outside of Peabody actually. And, so you sort of end up at this place, and so I almost feel guilty when people, sort of ask like, what did you do to get there? Because I know what I did. But I'm still not entirely sure how I did all of the things. I just know that I did them, right? But as far as sort of looking back now, or I guess looking forward, at what students could do, or what ideally would happen with students, I think if it would be possible for institutions to create an environment where that, sort of stumbling forward can happen for students, in a way where the people who are there to guide them aren't, sort of telling them what to do or how they should do it based solely on what's been successful for them. Because again, the world is going to be completely different in 5, 10, 15 years. None of the things in this room literally existed, 15 years ago. So, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Also, I arrived at Peabody in 2016, teaching one hip hop class, and I still teach that class. But as as one would imagine, if you teach something and you have students that enjoy the class, some of them are going to want to be able to continue with whatever that subject matter is. And, whether it's hip hop, whether it's improvisation, whether it's anything that's new. And whatever is new doesn't have an inherent sort of system within which students can continue to gather information or knowledge. And because of the bureaucracy involved, if a student takes a class first semester of their freshman year, at the end of the semester asks if they can figure out a way to expand on that study, because of the bureaucracy, it might be before their junior year or their senior year before some way or system is figured out where they can actually do that. Now that I've been at Peabody for, this is my 6th year, I have a number of students who have been in the jazz department, computer music department, classical vocalists who have come to me and said, I really enjoyed these classes and I just want to explore more. I just want to be able to take more classes. I want to be able to, you brought in turntables to class. Like, do those live on campus? Can I have access to those? And so I think sort of for institutions to move a little bit more quickly for those students that really sort of want to do what I did without knowing I was doing it, which is take a little bit from here, take a little bit from here, take a lot from here, take some stuff from here and no, put that back. I don't want that, but be able to sort of explore so that down the road you can then synthesize these things when you're ready to push yourself forward in a direction that you didn't even know was there.
So I love the way you frame that, stumbling forward. I think that's great, because I think one of the big challenges for young artists is this idea, again, people are taught in a very specific way, and they're taught certain values, in our field, in our business. And getting back to what, Susan's comment about, not Susan, sorry, Sarah's comment about, but Susan, you commented on this as well, but Sarah's comment about broad curiosity, right? You have to be open to it. And I think you were obviously very open to it. And I think, and Susan was open to it. And I guess my question is, how do we instill more of that in our students? Because if you're going to have any hope of changing the arts institutions that they're going into, it starts here, right? As Sean said, this is ground zero. And so, I think I take that really seriously. And so to me, part of this is creating an environment where people can make mistakes, try different things, and, not put value judgments on an experience that they may not have thought of as the way they've thought of other musical experiences. So I think it's a really important conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Fred, go back to something that Wendel said. he said stumbling forward, but he said stumbling forward into opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think that last word there is part of the key in giving people a chance to imagine those opportunities. Do it in an academic setting is a hard thing to do. It's a little easier here. It's absolutely necessary as you become a professional, but how you get people ready to do that is a big question.
So yeah, and I think you can do it with curriculum. You do it with culture. I think there are a lot of ways you do it with mindset, because you do have to change the mindset. I think that's the biggest issue in many ways. So in your place, Howard, my other question I wanted to ask you is so you obviously in your comments about New World, you were talking about community experience, the role of community engagement. You were talking about technology. You were talking about all these things. But let me ask you a question. Do you think the students that are coming out of there are way ahead in terms of, if they're successful and they go into orchestras, are way ahead of where those orchestral institutions are?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. A quick example, maybe not the most dramatic, but one of our players who's in a major orchestra, one of the big five.
Yep.
There are 15 of our players in this particular orchestra, 15 alums. And several years ago, he said, off the cuff, he said, Howard, he said, every time they want us to go out and represent the institution in the community, they always send a New World alum. The reason is because we teach them how to talk to the audience, formally, informally, on the street, wherever it might be. And so that's something that they're comfortable doing. They show that early on in their time in these orchestras, and the guys who are running these orchestras, they're quick. They pick up on that and know what to do with it. So yeah, they're ahead. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, but see, that makes me sad too, because that means 85% of the people in that orchestra can't do it or aren't doing it, or don't know how to do it. They
don't know how, or they were never asked, and some of them could, and some of them couldn't. But how you attack the orchestral structure, I take it one bite at a time. I mean, this is world domination is my goal, but
that's why
it's going to happen one alum at a time.
Yeah, and graduates of music, I agree. I mean, this is it happens very much at if in truth, if the 10 top music schools in the country change the way they're doing things, then you can change the field.
That's right.
So so I want to continue to sort of we're going to get to taking some questions from folks that are listening in also, but I want to stay on this track a little bit and talk about and ask you all. So what are in your mind sort of the sacred cows that limit flexibility today? We've been kind of talking around this, and we've been but I want to be more direct about that. And what are the things we got to go point blank at to really promote change? And I'll start with Susan. Let's come back to you and see what you think about that.
If I may ask a question about this, are you talking about specific policy? Are you talking about mindset?
I'm talking about all of the above. However you want to.
All of the above.
What they're taught, what their expectations are in a field, how they. Because I think it goes across a number of things.
Sure. And I will not pretend to be an expert on how large organizations run and what are necessary for those things. I can speak to my experience both as from ConcertCheck and also as a recent graduate. I do think that it is largely, for me, mindset change was huge, and I was very fortunate. Actually, when I was at the University of South Carolina, that was probably where I did the most work on this, which was not a major conservatory, but I had several mentors, both in my performance life and in entrepreneurship, who really helped change the way I just think about things in general. And I think giving students a space to soul search, which I think everyone here has mentioned a little bit, and having space within the curriculum to do that is really important, because I think that each artist, professionally but also artistically, needs space to really think about what it is about this medium that is meaningful to them, and how they want to present that to the world. So I think maybe one thing that could change is that kind of mindset around what's possible, even, and to not put limits on that. And there are no wrong answers in brainstorming. So.
Who else wants to take a whack at that?
Well, if I may here, Fred, I kind of wrote down a lot of things while I was listening to Susan, Howard, and Wendel, and you obviously here around this idea, right? When I was in college, my trumpet professor, Bill Fielder, would always ask me what a trumpet was. He would literally say, "What is a trumpet?" He had a high voice. "What is a trumpet?" And I would say, "It's a brass instrument." No. "It's a wind instrument." No. And then he would say, "It's the mirror of the mind." Mirror of the mind. And I would always answer the question wrong, even though he would, he'd tell me what it is, just because I wanted to hear that. And so finally I said, "Prof, what do you mean by the mirror of the mind?" And he said, "It's concept. Concept is the most important thing that you have." And I said, "Oh, concept." He said, "Concept for your sound, your product. What is that? What is that for you?" And so you asked, what are the sacred, sort of the things that are sacred cows, right? I would say it's that. It's conception. It's the product, the follow through of something that's in your mind until it is in some form of completion. Okay, so things that in a conservatory setting, what is that? That would be pedagogy. Having a good sound on your instrument. You still need that, no matter what you're doing with that instrument. It still has to sound good. And there still has to be a follow through of a product, no matter what that product is. So conception, in my view, is the sacred cow. Now, I think that where the issue comes in there is, how do you disrupt conventional ways of getting to concepts, right? And I think what happens there is that we have a rigidity inside of the curriculum and with the professors who create and deliver that curriculum, which is why I've had a love-hate relationship with the notion of tenure for a long time. I think it's important to have tenure and to be able to speak your mind and do those things, and know that if you're disrupting the normal, that you won't get kicked out because of it. However, if you're afforded the opportunity to not change for 50 years and say, "By golly, this is the way to do it because I did it and that's my version of success." I wrote down here, it says, "Your success is not necessarily the precedent of everyone else's success." Not necessarily. So I have my experience. We all have our experiences. However, if we're not willing to look at current practices and the experiences of those around us, especially younger individuals, then we're stuck, and we'll just be constantly catching up with in terms of having this rigid type of, this is the way to do it type of scenario, which is why we find ourselves in what I wrote down, the word disruption. When chaotic events happen, they are intended to disrupt everything. And that's why I'm loving this time period that we're in, because it is forcing people to change. It's literally forcing you. We can't go backwards anymore. And so it's either change your concept, you have the concept evolve, or you stay stuck in the past. So that's my answer to the sacred cow question and how we deal with that.
A great answer. Wendel, looks like you want to get in on this.
Yeah, it looked like Susan did too, but I have a longer index finger. Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the things that I think about often is well, as I mentioned in my presentation, I started out as a classical musician, a classical pianist, and I loved listening to all sorts of other music, but I wasn't really a participant per se for different reasons until later. You can see from the second half of that video that I do a lot of different things, but I've always been fascinated with sort of this idea of people talk about music and the arts, and they usually use words like beauty, to describe. But really, there's also this competitive element, which is present in all of life. For example, Howard was saying with great pride about the alumni of New World and the position that they occupy. Right? When we listen to a recording, if it's a favorite recording, that by definition means all other recordings are not favorite, right? And favorites can change, but there's this sort of this constant, competitive nature. I think that can be really positive, but it can also have detrimental effects without being negative. And what I mean by that is, for example, again, I play all kinds of music. I've seen it when people have written about me, or when people speak about me, they'll say things like, or if they're talking about the hip hop side, they'll say, "Oh, and he's classically trained," and what that means really to the recipient or from the person that's saying it is that, well, he's good at this, but he's really good because he's classically trained. And the fact of the matter is, there's a tremendous amount that I draw on from my classical training, but I couldn't really improvise at all until, coincidentally, I started to participate in free improv sessions that were not jazz based. It was just, I always associated improvisation with jazz, but my introduction to improvisation wasn't jazz at all. And on the flip side of things, a lot of times I would if I met a stranger and they said, "What do you do?" And I'd say I'm a pianist. And the first thing out of their mouth, they'd say, "Oh, I love jazz," right? Just because I look like I probably play jazz, So I do think that there's, hierarchy and silos, and I think that those are important in a lot of ways in terms of preserving history and culture. I'm qualified to teach certain things. It wouldn't make sense for me to be teaching a course on Palestrina just because I love music. So I think silos are important in some ways, but this sort of competitive hierarchical nature of things, I think, could definitely stand to be shifted or reviewed or reimagined.
It's really thoughtful.
Fascinating.
Susan or Howard, anything you want to add here?
I did have a quick thing that I don't want to commandeer the conversation, but just to go off of what Sean said in terms of the mirror of the mind, because that really hit me. I think that as we're talking about flexibility, when you have an art form or a tradition that has existed for a long time, it inevitably gets codified. You have sort of a way of doing things. And if we're not careful about thinking about what it is that we're trying to accomplish within a community, within a society, then we never question those things. And I think that is so important to do. So having statements like this of going back to the essence of things, the mirror of the mind, what it is that you're really trying to produce within a society, I think that can give you an opportunity to say, okay, well, the way that we're doing this actually benefiting that cause, or is it a shell of a way that benefited that cause at some point in time, And so I really appreciate statements like that.
Yeah.
So
Howard?
I have a very different tack to take here. I'm going to be real practical. There's a sacred cow in the music business that makes me nuts, and it's the fact that musicians are so separated from the revenue source.
Yes.
I think that is the most debilitating way to go at your life. So when our fellows come to us, one of the things we offer them, even in the earliest days, is if you have an idea, we'll help you raise the money to do it. We even do it with the high school kids who are part of our college track program. If they need a new instrument, we teach them how to raise the money to get at the instrument if their parents can't afford it. As you go forward and an idea blossoms and you say, oh my God, I can see that so clearly. And you wake up the next morning, you say, how the hell am I going to pay for that? Well, there is an answer to that question, but it's not an answer that's advanced very much in the academic setting. And I think that's crazy. So we encourage it. We help it. I have 3 or 4 at any one time, I got 3 or 4 fellows who are my informal responsibility as far as their projects are concerned. And we spread that out across the institution. I think it's bedrock important as we go forward.
I couldn't agree with you more, Howard. We have in the breakthrough curriculum here a course that is specifically focused on students actually pitch. They put together an idea and then they have to pitch that idea. And ultimately they end up in my office and we fund a certain number of them. So you're absolutely right. I think this is the kind of thing that is just very practical, as you correctly point out. Okay, I want to be respectful of the fact that I know we've got folks that want to ask questions that have been listening in. And so I'm going to ask Lauren. Lauren, do we have questions? And they should pop up on the screen. Lauren? Give it a moment. Okay, what are the ways and benefits of breaking down the walls between classical, jazz, opera, and musical theater? Yeah, I think this is we've been touching on it, but it's a really interesting question because, one of the things that I would just say is that I think that, and thank God for this, I think that, even when we think about composition, right, and contemporary composition, that I think composers are much more inclined to cross over into different, areas and experiences than they would have been 30 or 40 years ago even, and with a much more individual voice. But I think that and that in a sense goes to the core of this, but what are you all, who wants to speak to this?
I'll dive in there. As someone that has classical music degrees that primarily plays acoustic jazz music and have performed with a variety of different people, from Alicia Keys to all of these people really, artists typically don't care. Like the ones that are doing it, they typically don't care. They're trying to get to that product, right? I think that where the folks that care are the folks that are the sort of the gatekeepers of tradition. They care about those things. They care about, oh, this is jazz, this is classical music, and it's time for us to think about American music. American music has all of it in it. It's a big, gigantic pot of gumbo. If you look at gumbo, you got seafood in there, you got meat, you got vegetables, you got root, you have all of these different things, and you don't just say, well, no, that's a seafood dish, that's a this, it's gumbo. And I think we have to look at it that way. And I think that's the benefit ultimately, that America will find and celebrate its own cultural identity, and we could truly be that e pluribus unum. Now, it's something that that was said earlier in terms of monetizing it. I think that's one of the biggest problems, is that when you have the reason, a lot of the reason that these things are so sacred and so rigid is that people are trying to hold on to that revenue stream. They're trying to hold on to, oh, well, this is how I make my money, by saying, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is it. And they hold on to it thinking that if it changes some way, then they're no longer going to be relevant, meaning that they won't have a viable career anymore. Okay. Perhaps that could be true in a certain degree, but that doesn't mean that you can't change and you can't do this, that, and the other. So I think that it's always, all of it's always existed as one, in my view, because frankly, I grew up in a Pentecostal church where it was all, there was like jazz happening and classical music, and then all of this stuff happening all at once while people were like, singing and dancing on Sunday mornings. And I think that we need more of that in general. How to break that down is we just have to communicate with one another, and we have to accept one another and toss out convention and embrace the discomfort of this disruption that we're in, and pay attention to those folks that are, that like a Wendel, that and Susan, that are doing it every single day, and celebrate them much more.
So I would say that to that point, John, I think that composers are in a sense ground zero for this, because by conceiving across different genres and styles, there's you force, in a sense, the performers, you force the the flexibility that I'm looking at you, Wendel, and sort of interested in what you're a composer. How do you think about this?
Well, so I think, as is often the case when one tries to, I guess, speak or talk about art with words, the words can sometimes get in the way, right? So, for example, actually, it's not supposed to get in the way, but I think they can be interpreted differently by different people, right? So, when I think of breaking down walls, what I think is actually makes more sense is keeping the walls there, but putting in some really nice sliding doors, right? And you can that are see-through, so you can make the walls see-through, so people can see what's over there. I think that when we think about breaking down anything, or breaking is like one step shy of tearing down. And once you get to tearing down, it's like people are just angry, and I think what can result sometimes isn't necessarily better, but can be just a lot more confusing, right? Whereas, like I like going to the BSO and hearing classical music. I like going down the soundstage and hearing pure hip hop. I like co-curating the Baltimore Boom Bap Society, where we can bring in all kinds of genres to blend together. I don't necessarily want, a rapper on every classical show that I go to, right? So I don't think that's what we need. But I think if there are more instances where there's sort of this, cross-pollination or movement, through those sliding doors, so people can not only, in terms of audience members, hear what the result is, but I've learned so much as a musician from stepping into these other opportunities, or even being given opportunities, like with Sean and Brené's project Dizzy Spells, and they asked me to, come in on turntables, and, I'm pretty nice on the turntables, but I'm like, oh, well, I guess I got to practice now so I can get real, so, and that wouldn't happen if I, didn't have that opportunity to step, through the sliding door. But yeah, so I think the language can be very helpful in that regard.
I would suggest that the internet is our sliding door, and that this is coming at us faster than we even realize. I certainly hear it. We play the music of 25 or 30 living composers per year. And so I get a pretty good look, pretty good listen to what's going on out there. And I hear all of this wonderful mix of vocabularies. I think it's fantastic. But I think the internet internet will make it happen. How we choose to form it and shape it, that's our job. We've chosen that as our job.
Susan, anything you want to add to this before we go to another question?
Sure. I think that this is something that actually is happening very organically, as we're talking about like breaking down walls. And I understand that, like, from an institutional perspective, like obviously certain official things would need to change in order for this to happen. But I think that so often, like across all of time, we are so influenced by what we hear. It enters our subconsciousness, and that's basically what's happening right now. I think that, like Sean was saying, it's gumbo. It's just there. And I think as we continue the canon forward, that's going to be there. And as well as like the social political influences that are related to those movements, they're all going to just be ruminating in there, and it'll come out in compositions.
Great. Hey, Lauren, got another question? Okay. Can the panelists cite an example of a student that exhibited the ability to be inventive and flexible? I think we got a bunch of those. So you want to, Howard, you want to start?
Oh my God, where to begin? I'm cycling down through all these projects. I'm looking for one that's particularly juicy. Let me think about that. If somebody else got a quick thought.
Howard, I actually worked with one of your fellows this summer at Aspen, Carson Marshall,
sure.
who did a wonderful, he does this very cool program with meditation,
Yep.
which I think is just beautiful. And we did the program a couple of times on the truck, and it was something that, you know, was eye-opening for us. And we've taken bits of that, and especially when we're working with kids in schools, to help kind of bring people into a mental space to receive whatever music it is that we're about to present. So that was something that I just thought of off the top.
Okay, you've triggered. So this is, I'll give you two examples of this. One was called I Heard It Through the Grapevine, and we remade the theater into a tasting room. Now, there's 750 people that will fit in the theater normally. In a tasting room format with little tables across the top of every other row, you can get about 300 or so. And we had a sommelier, and she talked about the wine, and one of our cellists, Hillary Glenn, talked about the music, and the two of them had a great time going back and forth. I'm telling you, we won more friends that night. These people are still with us. They came for the wine, they stayed for the music. And the brass players then took it another step, and now we do every year beer and brass with the local brewery. It looks obvious to start when you think about it, or it looks easy. It's not so easy, because the scripting of it, you got to be inventive, you got to be thoughtful, and you've got to be entertaining. But it works, and it's given us these two new audiences.
Great. Sean, Wendell,
Well,
John?
there are several examples, but just to kind of start it off, I'll start by saying that my students helped me to realize that I'm the student. And I've been given the great fortune as a professor to be an eternal student, because as I get older, my students remain the same age. So I'm constantly learning from them. I'll give you two examples. And this is something that I say often. One of the greatest things that a student could ever say to me is why or why not. And I have a student, I won't give their names away, but she came in as a freshman to Berklee College of Music, and she would only play the flugelhorn in lessons. And so after about, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks, I said, you know, you really need to bring that trumpet in if you're going to be a trumpet player and you're going to have a career, and that I was speaking from my experience. And she said, why? And I said, well, this is what trumpet players do. She says, well, I'm a flugelhorn player, and I just want to play flugelhorn, and that's all I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I said, well, that's going to kind of limit you. I mean, I gave her so many reasons why it wouldn't work. And he says, well, why not? Why can't I create another path? And I said, you know what? I apologize, and don't ever bring the trumpet. We're just going to work on flugelhorn stuff. Now she's one of the leading soloists in Spain, for flugelhorn performance in jazz, and it's really phenomenal. Another student that I have who won't mind me saying what his name is Aaron Janik, who is a fantastic trumpet player. He could play circles around me. And in his senior year, he said, Sean, I really love playing the trumpet, but I'm really into technology, and I'd like to build you a pedal board. I said, a pedal board? Like, what am I going to do with that? He says, well, think of it like mutes. And he's talking to the old guy, So well, it's kind of like mutes, but they're on your feet. So you'll have, instead of having these 3 traditional mutes, you'll have 11 mutes at your feet that you can just put your foot on, and then you sound like that. I said, okay, build it, whatever. He built this thing, and it's become like part of my sound now. And for me, that's like the greatest gift in the world, that I can just be this eternal student and constantly learn from my students.
That's great. Wendell?
Yes. Also, lots of different instances of this. but I'll give one specific one. So in February of 2020, the hip hop ensemble gave the first hip hop ensemble concert, Peabody Hip Hop Ensemble concert ever. It actually also ended up being the last public Peabody performance before everything shut down. So we have that distinction. But in preparing for it, that ensemble was, I want to say we had 7 people, 7 young musicians in there. And none of them had really ever done anything like that before. Some of them were production community music students, so they would create music, but they'd never performed it live. And then we had a saxophone player and a violinist. And so I asked them if they could, the assignment was to produce something that we would then split up and figure out how to play electronically amongst all of the students. So, and I knew what their capabilities were. So they all came into the next meeting with these like basic, really simple tracks. Like they were, sounding like beginners made them. And so, of course I had my teacher's hat on. So I said, I'm really interested to hear why, what your process was. Why are these so simple? And they said, well, we made things that were easier because we wanted to make things that we could play. And I said, no, let's not approach it that way. I want you to make whatever you want to make, however you want it to sound, and then we'll figure out how to play it exactly that way, which is what we ended up doing. And the performance went really well. And one of the students after the performance, we were in the back, backstage, and I was just so proud of them and telling them how proud I was. And this student, he goes, you know what this is like? This is like those 80s like sports movies with the kids where they start the season and they're like terrible and like can't pitch or catch. And then at the end of the season, they got to play like, the big bad team, and they like scrap together and they beat them. And we all just started laughing. And I was just really proud in that moment, because that really is, what it was like. But it felt good to have that come from the student and not from me.
Bad news bears. Yeah, excellent. Lauren, another question. Do traditional concert and recital halls present obstacles to change for both who's on stage and who's in the audience? Do you find that they support diverse forms of music or just accommodate them? I think that's a great question, actually. Who wants to take a shot at that?
I would happily take that on.
Howard.
We have a 750-seat theater that was designed for flexibility. The seats are steeply raked. The Alaskan cedar floor is quite bright. It washes the color up into the face of the musicians. The audience can see the musicians, and the musicians can see the audience. It has 10 mechanical lifts. You can lift the middle and drop the sides. You can turn it. It can be theatrical in a variety of different ways. And we use it constantly in various configurations. It has 4 alternate platforms, which means you can have small ensembles there and large ensemble on the big platform. You go back and forth seamlessly. And it has projection surfaces, about 1,000 square feet of projection surface that is hanging right above the stage. That's actually the acoustic baffles, but we use it for projection very much on purpose. And the flexibility of the hall remains dramatically different from concert halls, which are built for use over hundreds of years, not weeks and months, but a long, long time. And I'm constantly going to these halls and thinking, wow, this is so fixed compared to where I hear music on a daily basis. And I think, God almighty, can we break out of this? I don't know how we do it. I just know that we built for flexibility, and I think it's the future.
Howard, I love that. I love like the thoughtfulness and the nuance that you're talking about in your hall. That's really cool. I mean, obviously we built our own hall.
Yes, you did.
Largely because of these questions that were brought up, and I think that I was kind of strange person in my graduate studies. I would like go up to random people and ask them what they thought of classical music and like what they think about classical music concerts, and try to like get an idea of how one who is not brought up in this tradition sees it. And I think that there are a lot of people who are intimidated by the hall, and who feel like they're not welcome at the hall, or they feel like there's just like a coded set of rules that you have to follow, and that they don't really understand. And those are the things that we were trying to eliminate with Concert Hall, and to answer the question of, does this music stand on its own if some of those things don't exist? And I think it does, obviously. And if we're talking about diverse forms of music, if you tear down some of those sort of preconceived ideas around the art form, it breaks some rules in the sense that you can start introducing new things and experimenting with new things. So yeah, I think that different answers, obviously, to address this question, and we've done it differently, but this is just our way of trying to answer that.
That's great. Yeah, Sean.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that this country is still pretty young. The concert halls and things like that. What are we, about 150 maybe years in, 100 or maybe 200 years into having the Carnegie halls and the things like that. So I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. That being said, we have to look at individuals as well. It's not just the hall, it's the folks that are running the halls. And I think that, folks like Howard, Susan, my good friend Randall Klein from SF Jazz, Wynton Marsalis, these are the folks that are creating the new standards for what a hall looks like. And I think it's important for us to stand with them and support them, and not only go to those places and support, but also tell our friends, those of us that are performing artists, say, hey, go check out this hall. Maybe you could play there. Everyone doesn't have to play at Carnegie Hall. There's more to life than that. There's more to life than Lincoln Center. Those are great places. And like you said, Wendell, we need those places because we want to keep that tradition as well. However, it's time for us to look at these new venues that are sprouting up and support them so that we can imagine what can go on in those spaces.
Yeah.
Wendell?
Yeah, just a couple quick points. In terms of the first part, do traditional concert and recital halls present obstacles to change? I think we need to make sure that we are thinking about this as a very nuanced topic. Everybody knows what a compliment is. Everybody knows what a backhanded compliment is. Right? A backhanded compliment is still a compliment, but there's something a little off about it, right? Depending on what your personal psychological makeup is, you can hear a backhanded comment and only hear the comment, or you can hear a backhanded comment and not hear the comment at all and only hear the insult, right? And so, with regards to to these obstacles, you can have an obstacle and not remove it, but you could just make it less obvious, right? So, for example, I would like to see, for example, more. You could take any minority group, but I'm going to take Blacks, being an African American myself. I would like to see more Black composers represented on programs that aren't Black History Month programs, or Black composer programs. Like just put it on the regular season. Don't put it on an educational concert and then then sort of in your yearly annual reporting talk about how many more minority composers you've presented when you didn't present them on the main stage during a main show. Now that said, that also links to the last part of this question. Do you find that they support diverse forms of music or just accommodate them? The way this works is any accommodation ultimately ends up being support of some kind. It's not necessarily the support that one should get, but if you present a program that accommodates somebody. Somebody's going to be in the audience and they're going to hear that person. So it's still supportive, but it's measured support. And I think those relationships and subtleties are things that people in control really need to think about, as Howard is, for example.
So I mean, when you're saying that, the distinction there is it's interesting, Wendell, the way you put that is between, you know, accommodation and full throat in a sense. And, you know, I mean, one of the things certainly as we think about this here and the work that we're doing to weave we've had a group of faculty and staff working on this over the last year to weave a much broader range of creative voices into our curriculum and into the performances that happen here. I think you're absolutely right. I think this is, you know, it has to start with the curriculum, actually, and in order to make it to the performance space. And again, the value, you know, what are you asking of people in auditions? I mean, these are all things I think that are important pieces to this. I just can't resist saying one thing also about this. You know, I've spent my life in concert halls and in recital halls but I have to say that some of my most memorable experiences as a listener have not been in concert halls. And one example of this, we had a composer, a student here 5 years ago, a young woman who composed an opera. Opera was called Stinney, based on, if you know the history of the story of George Stinney in South Carolina, the youngest kid ever executed and wrongly executed, was exonerated later. It's a tragic, horrendous story. She wrote an opera based on this. It was presented in a it's almost like a club-like setting in Baltimore, and and it's the effort of a younger composer and all that entails. But it was one of the most powerful experiences I think that you could have in terms of impact when you think of what art should do, right? And the way it should impact people. I think of that and other similar experiences, even more than of all the wonderful experiences I've had in concert halls throughout my career. So I just have to share that. Maybe we have time for one more question, Lauren. What is an example of a time when you experienced discomfort in a new experience situation that helped you grow or move forward in some way? Great question. Great question. Who wants to start with that?
I'll go ahead and start. Honestly, in my career in higher academia, the biggest discomfort, was leaving the Berklee College of Music and coming to Peabody. That was incredibly uncomfortable for me because, being at the Berklee College of Music, I was surrounded by people that were like me. I was surrounded by jazz musicians. We played jazz all day long, and that's what we, it was like that's what we did, and it was pretty seamless. When I made the decision to come to Peabody, in my mind, I knew that it was going to be work, and I didn't really know what to expect. But inside of me, I knew that I had to do this because I was called to do something else, to help. What you were saying, Fred, in those meetings, I heard it. I heard the vision. I'm like, wow, this is an opportunity to be about change. And so that was extremely uncomfortable for me. But again, I've sort of learned to revel in discomfort. I think if you want to grow, you got to be uncomfortable. And I'm glad that I made the decision to come down to Baltimore and be at Peabody. And I'm very thankful for the opportunity to take a jazz department from 6 people to now almost 46, 47 folks. And I would have never been able to do that if I didn't face my own internal fear of the unknown and go in the direction of what eternity was telling me to do through my spirit. One of my favorite quotes is, "Eternity is in love with the creations of time." And I think that's very appropriate for this moment in history. We are living all of eternity in this singular moment. We all have a beginning and we have an ending. What does it mean for it? What does our creativity mean inside of this time for all time? And I think we have to allow ourselves to be a little bit uncomfortable during this time so that we can take the past, institute action in the present to move it into the future.
So Sean's charge was literally we were starting from ground zero in a sense. We said, we want to remake the jazz program. It's not working the way we want it to work. And that was his charge. And he's done in 5 years, what he's done is remarkable in terms of the
Three.
Is it three? Not just the number of students, but the quality of the program. It's really extraordinary. Anybody else wanna answer this question? We've only got about a minute left because we're gonna sign off and give folks a break before we get back at 1 o'clock. But anybody wanna add to what we've heard here? If not, then I think we will, we'll go ahead and wrap up. You all have been a great panel, really wonderful, really thoughtful, in-depth and substantive, conversation. And I've got a greater appreciation for what all of you are doing. But I just, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for joining us.